Rock'em sock'em, sis boom ba, Frodo lives and rah rah rah. Welcome to D Infinity Live, your weekly multi-platform, multi-publisher online tabletop gaming supplement. I am your host, William Big T Thrasher. With me, as always, is Michael Jolly Varhola and Brendan Cass. How you doing, gentlemen?
Good.
Good.
Excellent. And tonight we have a very interesting philosophical topic. We're going to be talking about GM metagaming. We're not talking about specifically GMing or metagaming from the GM's perspective. We are talking about the GM as the metagamer. But before we go into that, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. First, Brendan, what is going on with our website, d-infinity.net?
Well, to go along with our show on metagaming, we have a meta article written by Chris Van Deelen about the 5 types of gamers that he doesn't want at his gaming table. And I have to agree, particularly with his number one, is the guy who shows up and doesn't really do anything. I don't really understand those folks. You're there to play the game, not watch. Otherwise, could have invited somebody else. But yeah, fun article. He describes why exactly they get on his nerves. Will, your practical magic, your tweak weapon, not only has it been very popular on the website, it's also been very popular on Facebook, is a spell where, given different circumstances, you can change your weapon from one type into another, which is very handy when you go into a dungeon filled with oozes and all you have is a greatsword.
Very true.
And then Chris Van Deelen is, well, he's actually written quite a bit this week, but he's also continued his short story titled Buck Who. He wrote Chapter 2. It's a fun sci-fi story, and if you liked the first one, or if you haven't read the first one, it's also up online on d-infinity.net. But if you like the first one, definitely check out his second chapter. And in the meantime, while you're reading it, you can bake cookies and pick a type from the Who Wants a Cookie D100 table of random cookie types. So there's all kinds of different things on the website right now. I think it's probably got the best mix of variety that I've seen in a while.
And if I can hype the random cookie generator, it not only generates what your cookie is made of, it also generates the quality and texture of the cookie.
These are things people need. This is a massive gap in this industry, is being able to generate cookies on the fly, and now you finally can.
Well, and it's funny how something like this, how it goes both ways with game design, how something like this will be inspired by a gaming scenario, but at the same time also inspire any different numbers of games or encounters or whatever. Right. So I love accessories like that. It's a lot of fun.
Excellent. And Michael, what is going on this week with our co-publisher, Skirmisher?
Well, I've got 3 things that I'd like to mention. The first 2 deal with drivethrurpg.com. That is the retail site where we initially release a lot of our publications. So everything we do ends up in multiple sales venues. But drivethrurpg.com is usually where our new releases start off. So our new release for this week is La Bayonet number 32. And this is, in fact, a copy of the original La Bayonet number 32. From World War I, a century ago, that we produced this publication from. And what La Bayonet is it's a World War I French propaganda magazine. So it's full of French cartoon art from 100 years ago and has a lot of great images of weapons and soldiers and battlefields, just all these things from the era of the Great War, drawn from the perspective of people who were there at the time. And we happen to own a collection of La Bayonet magazines and realized this is something that people would appreciate having access to. Maybe not so much the fact that it's a French magazine, but the fact that this is great cartoon art that has images that are really unavailable anywhere else and are going to be lost to the ages when these magazines disappear. So part of it is that we want to make this stuff available, but part of it is also that we just don't want it to be lost. So La Bayonet, number 32, our 4th issue of Le Bayonet since the centennial of World War I began in August, just out this week. The other thing I wanted to mention is that all of our publications on Drive-Thru-RPG and RPG Now, they are available for download as PDF publications, but increasingly now they're also available in print. So 4 of our publications are now available for people to purchase print copies of on Drive-Thru-RPG. And the most recent one is our own Lloyd Brown's Game Retailer Guide. So this is one of our most popular books. People want to learn how to sell games. This book will tell you how to do it. And now you can get a print copy of it. And you see it's a very robust book. It's a nice publication. And then the others that are available in print are Clint Staples' Mythos Society Guide to New England, which is a beautifully illustrated book. It's got a lot of nice things in it. Experts, which is one of Skirmisher's, this is a OGL version, a D20 version of one of our very first books. It's a D20 version of the very first book we ever released in 2002. And then our ever-popular off-color Nuisances Director's Cut, which can be really used with any role-playing game. It's really got D&D/D20 in mind. So these are all now available in print, and I would encourage people to check out them and our other releases, Skirmisher's other publications.
They're also in print if you prefer, because you have Amazon Prime and you like the 2-day shipping. They're also available in print on Amazon. So if you want to take advantage of your Amazon gift card that your grandma gave you over Christmas, you get them on Amazon. They're also available there.
In your case, being young, it's your grandma that gives you the Amazon gift card. In my case, being old, it's usually my kids who give me the Amazon gift card.
Right, right. If you're a grandpa receiving an Amazon gift card, you can spend it there that way too. We don't discriminate.
Exactly.
No, there's a gothic horror story to be written there, though, where a person is haunted by a grandfather is haunted by the spirit of his own grandmother, who just turns out this ghoulish spectral figure is just trying to deliver one last Christmas present.
Exactly, that's a good story. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that the Skirmisher crew, or to say a Skirmisher crew consisting of myself and Brendan Cass here, are going to be doing a Skirmisher promotional cross-country road trip. We're going to be starting in Chicago about 30 days from now, and we're going to be visiting game stores in every state on our chosen route between Illinois and North Carolina. So we're going to be going to game stores and meeting with game store owners and shooting some cool promotional videos, clips of which we'll have shown in this spot, and meeting with fans and artists and developers, and really just doing everything that a publisher does, but on the road from Chicago to North Carolina via Washington, D.C. So there's going to be a lot of great material, and we're going to make sure that we share it with everybody. And we're going to be jumping off and doing that first week of March. So we'll keep you posted. There's nothing we do that we don't talk about a lot, but we'll keep everybody posted on that as we ramp up for it.
Now, you know, some lucky viewers out there might be able to experience Michael's Jolly in person.
Exactly.
That's right.
Well, and that's part of the drill. We're going to be contacting game stores that are going to be along our route, and the ones that say, well, if we have time to meet with you when you come by, we will. No, fuck you. We don't have time for that. But the ones that say, wow, that would be great. Come on by. Demo some games. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to see your crap. Lie to us. I don't care if I'm being lied to. That's fine. We're going to pick at least one enthusiastic game store per state, and that is where we're going to go and just camp out for a little while and meet with our fans and meet with people who want their stuff published and demo some of our things. So we're going to find what do they call it? The friendly local game store in each area that we're passing through, and spend some time with them and their customers and our developers and fans, etc.
Cool. And Mike, before we move on to our main topic, I have to know the print version of Nuisances that you've got. Is that the edition that has the naked dwarf on the cover page?
It is. Yes, it's right there, front and center, as it were.
Is that Throbbing Oakenshaft?
Throbbing Oakenshaft, yes.
There you go.
Yes, Mike, speak up so the audience can get a look at that when the camera shifts.
Oh, can everyone see it?
There it is. Yeah, that is fantastic.
He is the world's largest dwarf, after all.
Yeah, indeed it is. Everything on that broadsheet is absolutely true, every single word of it. All right.
Good stuff.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is time, once we get our giggles out anyway, it is time to move on to our main topic, which is GM's metagaming. This is actually a fairly big, fairly complicated topic that I think a lot of players and GMs don't consider, and it's certainly something that I've never seen addressed in any sort of GM section of a rulebook I've ever encountered. Now, I've encountered quite a few. So rather than doing our normal intro, I'm just going to go ahead and jump to our first question from Lucas per year. What is GM metagaming? So we'll just go around and have everybody define what GM metagaming is to them. Brendan, why don't you begin?
Well, that's a good question, Lucas. So GM metagaming, and we took a big bite for this show because it is complicated, and it's one of those things that GMs will sort of pick up intuitively over time, and even if they don't realize they're doing it. But I'm going to continue being vague, and then I'm going to get to a real answer. GM metagaming, so player metagaming is something that happens all the time and shouldn't. GM metagaming is something that doesn't happen often enough and should. So GM metagaming is a good thing. It's the responsibility of the GM to metagame, and so here's what that means to me. GMs are responsible for understanding all of the metagame elements. So what is a metagame element? Well, if you know, for example, that some of your players are inclined to rush headlong into combat rather than think things through, that's a meta concept. There's nothing in the rules. It's not actually part of the game. It's something that you know because you know the person playing the game. That's what makes it a meta concept. If you know that your players like to read ahead or are very well versed in your campaign setting, if you know that they're all huge zombie nuts, for example, right, and you give them something that resembles a zombie, GM metagaming is understanding that they're going to jump to conclusions based on their own meta-knowledge, and it's your responsibility as a good GM to use that in an effective way that actually tells a better story. So maybe you do want them to realize that they're zombies relatively quickly. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to change up the whole zombie thing altogether, and when they try to go for headshots, for example, it doesn't work because they only resemble zombies. That sort of thing. But it's the GM's responsibility to keep track of those meta elements and use them to his advantage.
And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, just answer the question maybe in less detail. What is GM metagaming? Any metagaming is taking outside information that exists outside the game, and applying it within the game. In short. Meta information. So it's interesting reading through the comments that have come in on our event page on Facebook over the last several days. Mostly the take people have had toward metagaming of any sort, even when applied by the GM, is that it's a negative thing, that this is bad, that the GM is metagaming using this information that he has just for purposes of screwing over the characters, the players. And that's sort of an interesting take. It's interesting that is the approach people would necessarily associate with this. But as Brendan alluded to, metagaming can be a very, very positive thing. So it can be negative, and people wrote about all sorts of negative examples, and we'll presumably talk about some of them tonight. But it can also be a very, very, very positive thing as well. Should I mention what I think would be a very positive example, or
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
go for it, Mike.
I guess where it strikes me that things would be most positive is that a fantasy game setting, a whole other fantasy world, is theoretically an incredibly complex place. I mean, if you meet somebody from another culture in our own world, we can't necessarily expect that we would have the same cultural references, that we would have the same basis of knowledge that they do. Yet somehow we just expect that when we launch a fantasy world that none of the players are familiar with, that we all have, the same understanding of it. Well, there are ways that the GM can use meta knowledge in a very positive way to make the world seem more like a shared, compatible place. And I won't go into all the ways that can be done. What's the way I've done it with the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting? I've set it in the real world. The Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting is a fantasy campaign setting that is based on the Aegean Sea area in the Dark Ages. So there are a lot of assumptions that intelligent players will have that they can freely draw upon. Anything they know or think they know about the gods of ancient Greece, the Olympians, the Titans, the gods of Egypt, anything they know about Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, anything they know from Bullfinch's mythology, this is all fair game. This is all the basic knowledge that they as players have, which their characters can then draw upon. And I, as the GM, am metagaming by making that information valid and relevant in the context of the game. So a positive and constructive example of how to metagame.
It does. It adds a ton of depth to the each individual scenario when you include elements like that players, if you as a GM meta game by including little features that can be picked up on by players with meta knowledge, you can add a whole lot of depth that they may or may not notice.
Right.
But for the players who do notice, it's that much more rewarding for them to play.
And there are players who, even if you are trying to constructively metagame, they just don't have that much knowledge about anything. So it's kind of hard for you to use that to good effect. But I can think of any number of times where it worked out really well for me as a GM and for the players. I remember we had a scenario where I had a creature called an Old Man of the Sea. And this is actually a monster that Sinbad bumps into in the 1001 Arabian Nights. And one of the players remembered that the Old Man of the Sea is particularly susceptible to alcohol. They had read this when they read the 1001 Arabian Nights. Well, I considered this to be perfectly valid. I didn't feel that I'd been screwed and my monster had been undone because the players knew this. No, I was actually very pleased that I had a fairly obscure monster. And the only way the player could have known that is because they happened to have been intelligent enough to have read the 1001 Arabian Nights. So that was actually very, very satisfactory to me.
Yeah, I've got to say that for me, GM metagaming, it's a tool that you need in your GM's toolbox. It's like a hammer, and like a hammer, you can use it to build something amazing, like a treehouse or an awesome coffee table, or you can use it to cave in someone's skull and bang your own thumb. So it's a tool that really needs to be wielded very, very precisely. I know, like Amanda Call, good friend of the show, had said, "Well, isn't metagaming the GM's whole job?" I'm going to say it's probably about a third of the GM's job, because GM metagaming, for me, so much of it comes down to knowing the players, and
Yep.
and
That's right.
and to be able to anticipate player action, to know what motivates not just the players' characters but the players themselves, but most importantly, to not use as an excuse to screw the players over and to dick over their characters.
Right.
I'm not going to play something that in the game world that I know is going to push a player's button and make them run straight into a trap, because that's just not fun. That is betraying your players' enthusiasm and investment in the game. I like to think of it like a magician's gambit. You want to use it to kind of guide the players in a particular direction. You want to use it to give players choices without necessarily giving them choices, so you can create these thrilling encounters and these amazing challenges that in the end you do want your players to succeed. They may win a battle or lose a battle along the way, but if we're going to compare this to using the wargaming version of campaign, you want your players to win the war, to get to that awesome resolution, and GM metagaming is one way you can facilitate that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things, just as an aside, that you always hear, especially old school gamers talking about in real glowing terms, is the total party kill. When I've had total party kills, it's because the party has been stupid and unlucky. It's been that perfect storm of stupidity and bad luck. Neither one will lead to a total party kill in my game, but there are GMs, through GM metagaming or not, who love that TPK. They think it's just the greatest thing. Well, you know what? If your game is all about TPKs, then your campaign is a series of short stories. It's not an epic novel of the characters. And if that's what you're into, if you're just into a whole series of unconnected short stories featuring dead characters in every one, so be it. But for me, it's much more satisfying to have some deaths along the way, some epic and sad and unfortunate and tragic character deaths, but that all being part of a richer, longer, broader story.
Sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned the total party kill. If I can just talk about some good GM metagaming, the only time I've ever done a total party kill was basically by setting up an unwinnable conflict that I knew the players are going to be motivated in. But I did that because that was the beginning of the campaign. The whole campaign took place in the afterlife.
See, there you go.
The whole campaign was about fighting your way out of hell. And gathering allies and experience along the way, so that you could eventually reface that foe and defeat it. With the full force of the damned behind you.
Right.
So I think this is a tricky concept, and it's tricky to use effectively. So I think it can't hurt to go over a few more examples, since you gave one, Will. And Mike, I think you should go over the example that is probably my favorite one, which you wrote about. But I'll let you tell that story. But
From Bloodsuckers?
From Bloodsuckers, it's totally
okay. I will certainly do that.
Absolutely my favorite one, and I think it's probably the best example of this concept. But I know that my players, for example, the group I'm playing with right now, is likely to jump into a situation and act based on appearances rather than having gathered any deeper information. So I've used this to my advantage to really draw them into an adventure and really get them motivated to fight the villain that I've created. And it wasn't a contrived thing either, because but based on appearances, I had it's always a female character I've noticed that they fall for. It's the easiest way to get them to trust people and not roll for sense motive and all that other stuff. Just give them a female NPC and they'll just do whatever quest you ask them to do.
I knew the sorceress was trouble the moment she entered the tavern.
Right, exactly. But I've had them run on quests only to have that quest be, when completed, something that was completely against what they normally would have done. But it had all of the trappings of a noble quest, acquiring a relic of Poseidon in a sunken temple of Poseidon, and the cleric of Poseidon was super gung-ho about doing this, was very proud of himself when he breached into the inner sanctum and was able to talk himself past this paladin, this ghostly paladin of Poseidon, talk himself past it, and he's there in this empty room looking for this relic. And there's just a mural depicting some story, which he blows off. It's not interesting to him. But the woman who gave him the quest then walks in, looks at the mural, receives a piece of information that was a very sacred secret held by that particular temple, and passes it on to the cult of Dagon, right? So
Right.
then she takes off, pops a potion of invisibility, and she's a major villain from there on out. Players hate being betrayed almost as much as they hate being tricked. They hate being tricked. So, but I knew that because all of the window dressing looked right, that they would just jump headlong into this and not ask any questions. That
Not
was
just a
me.
villain, but actually a nemesis.
Right, a nemesis, exactly. They ended
Even
up
better than a villain in a lot of ways.
absolutely. They've been on a few adventures that were directly a result of her doing.
And actually, this is a device we see in comic books a lot. We'll have the two characters who are actually superheroes in their own right, but when they come together, they end up, neither's a villain, but
Right.
they are, in fact, at odds with each other. Now, of course, this character you're talking about, as far as I'm concerned, she was actually a villain as well, right?
Oh yeah, big time. Big time.
Yeah, and this actually harkens to something, because I run a lot of investigative games. Any game I run, there will be some level of an investigative element. There will be clues that people will need to find, hints that they'll need to find. And I've run games where there has been a significant NPC that turns out to be a traitor, whether they start that way or something that the adventurers have done displeases them enough that they decide to become a turncoat. And a bit of GMing metagaming that I use, because I hate it when that kind of thing comes out of nowhere in a novel or a movie where a character it's just suddenly revealed to be a traitor. I give the players every opportunity to figure out what's going on.
Right.
I will, whenever possible, make sure that before the betrayal comes, 3 hints of some sort have been dropped. Whether it's the NPC, going missing for some reason and never really being able to account for where they've been, or acting suspiciously, or
Right.
or inquiring about information that they probably shouldn't need to inquire about. Those hints will be there, and that's useful in a number of ways. One, a clever player will pick up on that and act on it, and that can lead to all sorts of interesting complications in the game. But also, when the sudden but inevitable betrayal does come, the players don't feel dicked over, because they'll suddenly go, "Oh, that's why he was wearing the red vest."
Sure.
And suddenly it'll all fall into place, in that moment. And that's one of the ways you can use GM metagaming, because I don't think any GM wants to be accused of dicking over their players. I don't think any GM really, wants to, at least no good GM wants to sit smugly and look at some angry players because all their characters just died. You want to give them every opportunity to see the punch coming before it lands.
And I ran a murder mystery recently, and you're absolutely right. If you have those investigations in your session, that almost counts completely on meta knowledge, because you can't just prompt people to make skill checks, because that gives it away. Right? That'll give the clue away. That'll give the punchline.
They've got to make the skill check.
They have to make those skill checks. They have to propose the skill check, which means you have to get into your players' heads. You have to think, if I leave this particular item in the victim's inventory and they go through the inventory and see it, what are they going to think? What skill are they going to try to use?
Right.
You have to know front to back what's on their character sheet skill-wise, and you have to know what they can cast with spells and what items they have and all of that. And you have to think you have to think the way your players play their character in order to get an effective like murder mystery to work. Otherwise, it's just going to be you as the GM prompting people to make skill checks, and if they succeed, then eventually you'll tell them what the story is. They're not actually going to figure it out themselves, and that's the fun in a session like that. So I think that's the perfect example, Will.
But it depends on your players, okay? So, for example, I've got a certain player who you know, Brendan, who always plays an axe-wielding dwarf, and honestly, any innocuous detail about an NPC is going to set him off on just this paranoid tangent, and actually, just having him not kill everything he comes into contact with in a scenario is really just a trial as a DM. So I'm going to use all my GM skills just to minimize the amount of data that's going into this guy so he isn't slaughtering everyone around him. So murder mysteries work less well if he's the one that's processing the data. And I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Am I wrong about Ollie?
No, it's true. But Mike, see, that's because he is metagaming as a player. He thinks he knows you. He thinks he knows your style.
And he's always wrong.
And he's always wrong, but because he thinks he knows your style, he's basing his behavior on expecting you to try to kill him somehow.
Which has never actually happened.
Oh, that's right. It's never happened. But that's why I said
in 25 years, it's never actually happened.
Right. That's why at the beginning of the session I say, well, players shouldn't do it. They do it way too often. Because you know what? They don't. It's the GM's responsibility to know what his players or her players think he or she might do in any given situation, and then either do it when he wants to lull them into a false sense of security, or do something completely different to shake things up.
And that is not an example of negative GM metagaming. There is such a thing as sort of playing the characters. And the example you brought up a little earlier was a scenario that I ran several years ago for the first time called Bloodsuckers. And I've run this scenario 3 or 4 times now, and every single time the result is exactly the same. And basically, it starts off with a party, often a very low-level party, in Coast City. So this is part of our Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. There will typically be a ranger who specializes in hunting undead, and they will notice a quartet of black-robed figures moving through the shadowy sections of the street. And as they observe them, they start to pick up on all sorts of details. A stench of freshly turned earth, long black fingernails, clammy white skin. And they realize, oh my God, we've come across a nest of vampires. And every time I've run this, they get to the point where they've killed 3 or 4 of these things before they figure out that it's really just a group of goths. They're just people who have adopted a certain persona and a certain look, and they interpret every single thing. You know, when they finally encounter them, they fire a crossbow bolt at the back of one, and it goes whizzing off the creature's back. No, it couldn't be because this is a female cleric who's wearing plate armor. It can only be because she's a vampire and you didn't use a magic weapon on her. And then they'll catch one and they'll pound a stake into its heart and it'll die. Oh my God, it must be a vampire. That's right, because only vampires die when you bang metal or wooden stakes into their hearts. And every time I've run this, it gets to the very end of the scenario before the players actually start investigating beyond their perceptions and say, oh my God, we just wiped out 4 human beings that we know nothing about. We don't know if they're evil. We know nothing about them. All we know is, the cleric will try to turn them. Oh my God, they really are vampires. They're too powerful to be turned. But they interpret it every single time. Every detail gets interpreted to support their contention that they're dealing with a group of vampires.
But
really
and
what
it's
this
true, Mike. They do. Everything gets turned to turn what they assume they must be vampires. And I played it with you once, and
You're right,
everyone
right.
when things started when they started behaving unvampire like, that's when all of a sudden people just, oh my God, they're a mutant strain of vampire.
Right.
They're a vampire with some sort of template applied to them. No, because they had to justify it. They had to be vampires. The cognitive dissonance was too great. If they weren't vampires, then they were just some regular people who they murdered. They
Right.
murdered them in their home. That's
Right,
why that
exactly.
is.
They follow them back to their home. Oh, their nest, their lair. It's okay to kill people in their home if you call it a nest. It's okay to kill them if it's a lair, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have both brought up something that's a huge and important thing to do as a GM when you're metagaming as the GM, and that's to take advantage. 'Cause the thing is, the human brain is a wonderful thing that really is built to find patterns. The problem is it's so good at finding patterns, it can find patterns where none exist. And part of your job as a GM metagamer is to take advantage of your players' habit-forming or pattern-finding instincts. You know, they assume that the game's going to be very tightly constructed and there's always going to be very linear paths of cause and effect. And when you start to see them seeing these patterns of cause and effect where there are none, you have to seize on that opportunity. I did an urban fantasy game ages ago where, just kind of as a joke, I had used the number 23 for two things very early in the game. And by the end of the first session, the players had a list of 37 things in the game that corresponded with the number 23. And like whether it was the number of letters in something's name, to if you the best one, I gave like a street name, and a player had worked out a numerical value for each letter in the street name based on where it falls in the alphabet, which if you added together added up to 23. And the first two things of 23 really was just a joke, and may very well have been me being lazy and not being able to come up with two completely different numbers off the top of my head. But they became so invested in the number 23 that I started putting, every now and then, I would put in a real reference to the number 23 just to keep the momentum going, and then had to find a way to make that pay off in the game. And it was great. It actually made the campaign so much better to do that.
There's actually a book I would recommend, and it's not an easy read. It's a tough book, but it's intended to be a tough book, and it's Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum. And you know, I'm pretty well read, and I'm fairly intelligent, and I really understand esoteric things. As well as, you know, just about anyone short of Aleister Crowley. And when I read this book, I just kept coming up against things that I didn't understand. I was really, really baffled by a lot of what I was reading. And then I finally got to the point where I realized this is what the author's attempting to do. He's attempting to show that you really know nothing at all in this world that he's created. But he really uses, to, you know, at the nth degree, numbers and symbols a lot the same way that you're talking about with your use of the number 23. I mean, what you realize is that people can come to believe anything based on the data that they have if they apply their preconceived notions to that data. But he creates this world where in Foucault's Pendulum with tunnels going throughout the entire core of the Earth, connecting every place on the planet, and ley lines and Templars living underground, and he creates this convoluted, complex, weird world. And by the time you get to the end of the book, you say, you know, did any of that really exist? Was any of it real? So I would say that would be a book that I would recommend to anyone who's interested in that sort of thing, but GMs in particular who want to try to, you know, really take the concepts we're talking about to the next level in their games.
Mike, you and I, we are going to, based on Umberto Eco, we need to stat up semiology as a skill for adventurers to use.
We need to, absolutely, because that, of course, is what Umberto Eco is. He has a doctorate in medieval semiology. Yes, there is such a thing.
Oh, now something that came up very frequently in the comments on our show page were from both the player side and the GM side were incidents of well, how much do the player characters know about monster powers and weaknesses? How much should the GM take advantage of the PC's monsters and weaknesses and their preparedness for certain things? This I didn't realize how strongly people felt about all that until now. But I think as a GM, you do have a responsibility to keep the game interesting and challenging, to every now and then make sure you have an encounter that the player characters aren't specifically geared towards. Yeah. And feel and of course you have to base that off of your GM's knowledge of their characters' abilities and the player's habits. You can come up with whatever in-game justification for it you want, but I think that's a necessary tool, because not every challenge is supposed to be easy, not every challenge is supposed to be straightforward. Right. But also those are the times when the adventurers can get truly creative and truly heroic, and I live for those moments.
Yeah. And so I tend to be pretty ambivalent toward the monster lore concept. Players having read through the monster manual and knowing the strength and weakness of each monster. Mostly that's because I write a lot of my own monsters. It's really hard for players to know the strength and weaknesses of a monster that I made up. If they're particularly well read in their mythology, then they know where I got the idea from and can make some guesses based on that. But it's not. I don't really consider it a problem, because as a GM, I don't lose my poker face. They will say, "Oh, it's a troll. Oh, it's a troll," and I use troll as an example because I actually responded to that particular or one of those particular comments on the event page. I'm never gonna say, "Yeah, it's a troll. You got it right." Right. They can say it's a troll all they like, and if things behave troll-like, great. If things don't behave troll-like, that's just an assumption they made. Right. There are any number of things that might share a good number of descriptions or descriptors with a troll, and then behave completely different. But the concept of adventurer lore is fine with me, because you know what? That's what adventurers would probably be doing. Right. They're this mixed group of people that hang out together, and they share stories, and they're all constantly trying to one-up each other. And then you've got these people who are, they're saying, no, this is how you handle trolls, right? And so everyone has this notion of how to deal with trolls because they've talked to other people, and if your characters have made it to level 1, right? Presumably, there's been years before they even got to that point where they were kind of learning the ropes, where they had non-player character classes before they even became a level 1 fighter, where they had the opportunity to have these conversations with people and pick up on this tribal knowledge. But that doesn't always mean it's necessarily correct. And at the same time, just like deer eventually will clear out of an area where they know there are a lot of hunters, and they learn the sound of gunfire, and they know to run away from it after enough time. Trolls will eventually figure out, oh, hey, these guys are bringing fire weapons, and it's going to kill us. Right. So, if they're intelligent enough, and it is an intelligent race, they'll wear fire resistance amulets. Right. Then all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore, right?
Well, that's a fun way to play around with monster weaknesses and the player characters knowing monster weaknesses, because the example that often comes up when I have these kinds of discussions are vampires, because okay, vampires, you need holy water, holy weapons, stake through the heart, and that's true in the game because it's true in the movies, because it's true in actual European folklore to certain extents, and I think it's completely fair to have the players know that, because they've seen the movies that the monsters in the games were based on. So for me, it's all about the details and the obscure parts of the lore. But just so the players, yeah, sure, the players know the monster's weaknesses, and that means their characters are going to act as if they know the monster's weaknesses, but don't sweat it, because the monsters know what their own weaknesses are as well.
Right.
You know, vampires are weak against holy water. Doesn't stop a vampire from always staying outside of people's throwing range, because it's expecting people to throw holy water at it.
Well, and then the double baffle in the scenario that I described, I can't reproach I can't use vampires the way I use them, or the concept of the vampires the way I use them, and then reproach characters for knowing knowledge. For every time I jerk the players around and they encounter a group of creepy humans and think they're vampires, well, for every time that I abuse the fact that they have knowledge like that, I let knowledge like that work as well. I'm glad, like I said, like when we were talking about the Old Man of the Sea, that isn't even an official monster. And the fact that the player identified what that monster was and figured out that plying it with wine would get it off the shoulder of the person that had its legs wrapped around and was choking. I thought that was very clever. So I don't resent the players having that kind of knowledge. I think what one of you said a couple minutes ago about having situations where the players aren't prepared all the time for what they deal with, I think that's completely legitimate. In the scenario I described called Bloodsuckers, the players go to this little island expecting to find vampires. They kill off the people they find there who look like vampires. They find bodies everywhere with puncture wounds in their necks, and what they are universally horrified to discover every single time is the pool in the swamp with 10,000 larvae of mutant two-headed mosquitoes with double proboscises that when they suck the blood out of people's jugular veins make it look like they've been attacked by vampires. And the players never have the tools at their disposal to handle that swamp full of these creatures. And then the last part of the scenario is them going asses and elbows on this little island, trying to pull together the resources they need to exterminate the real threat that they've encountered.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, before we wrap up the show, I did want to talk about bad GM metagaming, because, as I said, this is something that can be abused, and sometimes abused horribly. And one instance of bad GM metagaming actually comes from a campaign I played in, along with friend of the show, Beth Ann Gilmer, back in Norfolk, Virginia. And this was this was a campaign. This was a very, very over the top urban fantasy campaign, but Beth and I came into the campaign late, and the GM had this big face-off encounter planned down to very meticulous detail, but because of the level of detail he had the encounter planned at, he expected that encounter to involve a particular type of party, and so as a result, as we're making characters, the GM kind of pressured Beth into making a very specific kind of character to make that encounter go a particular way, rather than just letting her play the character she wanted to play, and then just tweaking the encounter so that it would still go somewhere in the planned direction. I think as a GM, it's fine to use your metagame knowledge to tweak an encounter. No NPC, no encounter, no challenge, no storyline should be so precious and set in stone that you can't make adjustments to make the game better for yourself and your players, rather than trying to shoehorn players into pre-assigned roles.
Yeah. And I had an example like this in a game many years ago with what was in fact a very terrible DM. He didn't describe things badly. He knew the rules. But he would always try to hose the players, and we played through a classic scenario. I think it was, is it Hidden Temple of Sojkamp? Is that the one that's sort of a South American setting? And basically, it was set up for 3 or 4 pre-gens to run through. Well, we weren't using the pre-gens. It was like a 5th to 7th level adventure. We were using our own characters, and it came out at one point in the scenario, well, because these pre-gens were of certain classes and we weren't of those classes, he had just been operating under the assumption all along that we couldn't succeed in this adventure no matter what we did.
Oh.
Huh.
Dick. So what I would say, I guess what I would say is this: bad GM metagaming or GM bad metagaming is not a problem. It's not a problem in and of itself because it is only a subset of bad GMing.
Sure.
If your bad GM is not going to screw you over by metagaming, he's just going to screw you over some other way. Because I can look back and I finally just had to stop playing in this guy's game because he would always screw you over. And he wouldn't just kill you off. He would find some way to really screw you over. And sometimes he did it in a meta way, and sometimes he didn't do it in a meta way. And if you had taken metagaming out of his toolbox, he was still going to screw you over. You still didn't have a chance in his scenario no matter what. So I would say bad GM metagaming is not a problem in and of itself. It's just a subset of bad GMing in general.
How about you, Brendan?
Well, it can be tricky as a GM, and I kind of have a standing rule with my players just because it makes combat flow quicker and it actually saves them from themselves. I actually don't let players talk unless it's their turn. To keep them from sharing accidentally meta knowledge. So when it is their turn, if there is something they want to share with the other players, they can use a free action at any time to do that. But that's to keep player metagaming down, and it works pretty effectively. And it doesn't keep them from having their in combat conversations. It's just there's a whole turn cycle between them, so it's kind of funny in that way. But at the same time, it's as the GM, you know what everybody's doing at all times, and it can be easy to use that information for a particular NPC when there isn't any real way that NPC would know it. So when they act on that information, it's kind of contrived.
Yeah.
And the players don't necessarily know that it's contrived. They don't know that NPC had no way of knowing, but it'll. Your adventure will come off kind of Deus Ex Machina-y, right?
Or Diabolus Ex Machina.
Diabolus Ex Machina, because it's not working in their favor. So just be careful, since you know everything. Your players are telling you everything. Inevitably, all information flows through you. If you have to, keep on a sheet of paper, keep a list of what groups know so that you don't accidentally cross-pollinate and accidentally have groups act on knowledge that they otherwise wouldn't have known. Mm-hmm. It'll just improve the credibility of your adventure.
And if all else fails, to quote Bill Bridges from the GMing chapter of Fading Sun's second edition, when in doubt, blame a conspiracy. You can always come up with the explanation later.
That's funny. Bill Burrows said the same thing. Weird.
Yeah, so if you ever accidentally metagame, just make it part of a conspiracy and then have it pay off in a cool way.
It was the number 23.
That is, if you accidentally do it, that's a good save. You're right. Actually, that's very clever.
Yes, 23.
Yeah, it's all 23. Yeah, this will show up on the RPG.org forums. Why is my GM throwing all these conspiracies in now? I don't get it. That's what all the posts are going to be. It's going to be our fault.
Well, if anything's going to be our fault, it might as well be that.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I think we've had a fantastic conversation about GM metagaming, which means there's nothing left to do tonight except our final thoughts. And my own final thought simply will be blame a conspiracy. You can use conspiracies in your game to all in one swoop up the stakes, make the game more interesting, and cover any holes in your narrative. Although it helps to research some actual conspiracies so that things don't get too silly. But that's going to be my best GM metagaming advice. That if all else fails, just roll everything into a conspiracy. Brendan?
Follow @Skirmisher Games on Twitter. It's also coming up on Facebook, but if you want to get the posts quicker, follow @Skirmisher Games on Twitter. I am in development with the Little Orc Wars video game. I've been making good progress, and I've been posting screenshots of my progress, so you can follow all of the I keep saying progress, but progress as I go along. Yeah. and the plan is to have that released and playable by Comic Palooza. And who knows? Since I tend to be pretty generous with stuff like this, if you do end up following along on the Skirmisher Twitter account, you might end up landing yourself a free copy. So
I'll keep that in mind.
yeah, keep that in mind. Because this game is going to be a blast. It's going to be just as much fun as the floor game, and I know this because I've been playing with all the little mechanics, and I'm almost tempted not to finish the game because tinkering around with the catapult alone and knocking over little cylinders. I don't even have soldiers yet; they're just cylinders I'm knocking over.
And that's a lot of fun.
That alone is enough fun to almost tempt me to stop making the game. So the finished game will be even better. So keep an eye on that. I'm really excited about it, and I think people will really enjoy it.
Once they look like little orcs and their limbs are getting blown off when they get hit by the catapult shot, it's going to really be fantastic.
Yeah, right.
Okay, Brendan, you know what we need to do once we get actual orcs modeled into the game? We need to have one of the settings be an adjustable blood meter, so that when you hit an orc, it's everything from no blood to spiraling fountains of sanguine goo. It worked in Mortal Kombat. Why not here?
You know, it should work here too.
And Mike, what's your final thought?
My final thought is look for us at a game store near you, assuming you live somewhere along the route we're going to be traveling in March from Chicago to North Carolina. And if you are in one of those areas, shoot us a message. Let us know what game store we should be stopping at. Let us know what town we should be visiting. We've got a lot of options. We've got a lot of flexibility. We'll have less the day that we leave Chicago. But we've got a lot of flexibility right now. So touch base with us. Let us know if you want us to come by and demo something in particular, talk about something in particular. Just have a cup of coffee and shoot the shit and catch up about gaming and shoot an episode of The Infinity Live from some of the stores that we're at. But if you want to be part of that and want to see us and want to be seen by us, then let us know so that we can work it into our itinerary.
Fantastic. Well, I think we had a great show tonight. So all the stuff now is to sign off. So for myself, William Big T Thrasher, for Brendan Cass, for Michael Jolly Varhola, and from everyone else who contributes to our website, d-infinity.net, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.